following is a special presentation of KNX News 97.1 FM.
From the helpful Honda Sound Space on the Miracle Mile, this is Streaming Wars, the end of content's golden age.
A KNX News Town Hall, sponsored by the Autry Museum.
Here are Mike Simpson and Charles Feldman.
Hollywood's always reflected the changing world around it. Culture, sensibilities, technology.
But we are clearly at an inflection point, coming off a very historic half-year strike with streaming services rising and old business models falling. So what does the future of the entertainment industry actually look like? And what does this mean for what we all will see on the screen?
Well, that's what we're talking about. We brought together a group of people who are making, distributing, and covering the content. Ron Perlman, veteran actor, writer, producer, might know him as Hellboy, or one of the dozens of characters he's portrayed over the years. Ron, also the founder and director of Wing and a Prayer Studio. Cynthia Littleton, co-editor-in-chief of Variety, which has been covering the news of Hollywood for nearly 120 years. Karina Manishil, president of Mad Solar Productions, company on the leading edge of the film business, creative force behind movies like X and Pearl. We have Patrick Gomez, editor-in-chief, general manager of Entertainment Weekly, one of the most widely read sources in the country on the industry, and Duncan Crabtree Ireland, national executive director, chief negotiator for SAG-AFTRA, union representing 160,000 actors, broadcast journalists, recording artists, and performers.
Now, at the end of the show, we are going to take some questions from our studio audience, but we're going to start by, this is not a scientific poll by any means, but we're going to take a quick sample of what you folks think the state of the entertainment industry is now. So what I want to do is I'm going to ask you a question and just shout it out. If you think that the entertainment industry is doing just fine, shout out a good, really heartfelt yes. Wow, we're in trouble. And those of you who think that it's not doing so fine, a no? No. Ron Perlman, like they say, showbiz is your life. What do you think?
I'm with you guys.
Which one? The no's?
I don't know if this is working.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Oh, it is.
Thumbs
Yeah,
going
no,
up.
I'm in a state of constant mourning over the state of the entertainment industry because of how unrecognizable it is to the power and the glory and the effect that it's had on my thinking about the humanities. And so, yeah.
But Ron, do you think that there's any hope for it? I mean, you have a very pessimistic view on it. But
No, I'm incredibly optimistic.
you are.
I just hate the people who are running the show right now. You know, the art form of cinema and television, I guess, is an offshoot of it, was invented by family-run businesses, studios, and the competition and the lust for profits were every bit as real as they are now. But their version of competing with each other was to make better stuff than the next guy did, and make sure that it got to the audience as good as it possibly could. So that there was a pride of ownership that comes with a mom and pop sort of a business that is completely removed when it's corporate run, and corporations started taking over the movie business, the studios, and then the TV studios. When I guess I'm not a historian, but around the 50s, the studios started to falter. Gulf Western comes in, Sony comes in, Seagram's comes in, you know, and our entertainment, which was an offshoot of the desire to blow people's minds about being part of a collective consciousness, which is what our culture is meant to do, turned into the desire to compete for stock prices. And so that what was always an uneasy relationship between management and labor, the gap right now is the people who are in charge of, when the work finally comes down to those of us who do it, have zero in common with us, zero. And as long as that is, I sound pessimistic, but those of us who do it love it more than ever, and we will prevail when we kill the model that's currently in place.
Duncan Crabtree, Ireland, SAG-AFTRA. Where are we now post-strike, given the thoughts of the audience and the thoughts of Ron here?
Yeah, no, I mean, hearing what Ron said, and also with what the audience says, I think last year reflects that, right? Like what happened last year reflected the fact that there was a feeling among certainly the members of SAG-AFTRA, exemplified by Ron and many others, who not only supported the idea of a strike, but actually got out there, were on picket lines, were at rallies, were doing things, not just saying things, but doing things to try and help change the business, to help move it in the right direction, to move it in a direction that is less, perhaps about the audience of one, more about the collective consciousness that Ron was talking about, more about making sure that artists have control and that creativity remains in the hands of humans. And this was the kind of thing that people were fighting for. And so there is, I think, a reason to be optimistic, because that message resonated not just with the members of SAG-AFTRA, not just with the creative community, not just with the labor movement within the entertainment industry, but with the public, and not just the public here in the U.S., but the public around the world. I mean, we heard a very clear message, and that's why the results, after many long, hard months of fighting, the results were very favorable, because there is a growing sense that people want to take back control from big corporations, that people want to have their concerns heard and responded to. And I'm really excited to see what's going to happen this year, because we have other labor unions who are going to be fighting their battles with these companies. We have a broader cultural discussion going on about AI and what people are willing to allow AI to do with our culture and in their own lives. And I think if people are empowered, that's a great place to be starting from.
Cynthia Littleton, who's the co-editor-in-chief of Variety. Variety, as we mentioned, has been covering showbiz for 120 years. You haven't, but Variety.
1905. That is in fact the year I started.
Okay, okay. So Variety has seen, obviously, lots of changes in Hollywood. Where would you say the state of the business is now?
I will say that forgive me for plugging the home team, but Variety, one of the most enlightening things that I did during the strike was to go back and look in our pages and look at 1960, the last time that the Writers Guild of America and SAG-AFTRA were on strike together. And then I went back to 1980 and looked at the last time and the coverage, and it was so eye-opening. The patterns, the parallels, what was different, what was not. And that benefit of hindsight really is helpful. I think in any conversation about a golden age, or is it over, is it ending, I think to understand what happened last year, you have to understand the context of how not only has television changed, viewers can tell that television has changed, the rise of Netflix and Hulu and other streaming services, the ability for people to, what we call, 10 years ago we called it time shifting, the ability for people to watch any show. You no longer have to show up Thursday at 9 to watch your favorite show. You could watch it at any time. That had ripple effects. It changed consumer behavior to a degree that forced Hollywood would have much preferred the old system. They made more money, they had more control, but technology really did put so much in the hands of viewers. Behind the scenes, for actors like Ron, for writers, there was so much change in the way television and movies were produced. The nature of the way people worked changed so much, so quickly. It's actually almost an embarrassment that it took a strike to bring all of that. It took a historic dual strike to bring all of that in perspective. We could see those changes in the moment, but the cumulative effect of industry, transition doesn't begin to describe what has gone on in Hollywood in this past decade and is going to continue into the, certainly into this, well into this decade. There is a shaking out of corporate interests, and I'm sorry to say, but I think that in Hollywood, I think you're only going to see more consolidation in the coming years, and that is going to be challenging for individuals and unions. But I think to appreciate what we've been through, you have to understand really have to understand just how much things have changed behind the scenes and what pressure it put on working Hollywood. And so going forward, you know, we're coming out of an age of 600 scripted television series, you know, one for almost 2 for every day of the week. That was, although it was a bonanza of work, that was a bubble that was unsustainable, and when it eventually burst, it really burst. So there is so much to unpack. But I just want to say that also, I mean, at a moment when you can have things like a movie like Barbie, a television show that is distinctive as a show like Atlanta, you have a time when what's possible in content is awe-inspiring. It's just a matter of getting to how people distribute, how they make money. That is the big challenge. That is the actors and writers made incredible strides, but the larger picture of how that monetization happens, and compared to the old world where they where they just made sacks of money, now they're not making quite as much money. That is something that we're still in that messy middle of figuring out.
You're listening, by the way, to Streaming Wars, the end of content's golden age.
Karina at Mad Solar Productions, seen you nodding along to our panels. They've been talking, and some smiles, and I think some are like sad smiles at some of the stuff that's going on. But give me that sliding scale of the difficulty for getting the projects off the ground, the stories that you want to tell in this era that we're in.
It's a great question. I will say, listening to Ron, the idea of content made to entertain and a collective consciousness coming together to enjoy something sounds so romantic, which is the thing that leans into sad. The fact that you almost can't even imagine what would it be like to watch something and collectively all of us have seen it at the same time and want to talk about it together. The amount of programming is so vast, which is exciting in the sense that there's something for everybody, but I do feel like it's a very fragmenting experience when you consider how art is ideally meant to bring us together, to give us something to share. None of us are wrong in what we're pursuing, but because we're not doing it together, there's something that we're all sort of missing tangibly that has traditionally come from this form of entertainment. I would say that in terms of the way that I look at the business and what's happened, in addition to the strikes last year, I found that one of the most significant moments was that Netflix subscriber drop, because what happened was this reflective turn that the bubble is bursting, this can't continue the way that it's going, and every other streamer, whether they were starting to see their stock prices drop or not, started to react with, oops, let's go broad and safe. Let's go as 4-quadrant, easy, inexpensive. Let's not take those risks, because if it's happening to Netflix, it can happen to us too, and we don't want to be next on that totem pole. In the same breath, the financiers traditionally who do more interesting or innovative stuff and then will lay it off to a buyer reacted the same way. Hang on a sec, money's harder to come by. Cost plus model is not paying us what it used to be. What are we going to do except for things that we really believe are going to sell in a broad marketplace to a broad in buyer interest? So everything, I think, has dropped, I guess pendulum has swung to this drop in content production that I don't think is particularly interesting, but I do believe the pendulum always swings back and forth. I think that things are constantly in flux and constantly changing, even over the course of my time, even from that moment of House of Cards and True Detective at the same time where, I can binge TV and Matthew McConaughey is nominated for an Oscar and an Emmy in the same year, so you can pitch any piece of talent for television. There was such a significant shift there, and I do believe that things will continue to ebb back and forth. But my outlook, at least in my company, which is very culture facing, and we're partnered with Kid Cudi's and a constant dialogue with the kids. Lives in that frame of mind. My reaction has been, well, what are the kids paying attention to? They're gaming, they're reading comic books, they're watching animated programs, they're listening to music,
They
they're
watch YouTube
buying
more than
fashion.
anything else,
YouTube
right?
more than anything else. I mean, I feel like, as on the artist spectrum, not to say that all artists need to diversify, because that's not organic to, it's not an organic thing to ask, but at least for us, the reaction has been, play in different horizontals, because you're not then so beholden to the whims of the pendulum in our business.
Patrick Gomez, last but not least, editor-in-chief and general manager of Entertainment Weekly. So we heard Karina talking about the pendulum swinging back and forth. Where, in your view, is that pendulum now?
I mean, I think it's like going around in a circle like a clock moving too fast. You know, as it was mentioned, we're in a state of flux right now. And to go back to a little bit of what Ron was saying and also what we were talking about the history and when you look at the past strikes, the important thing to also is to take a step back and say, if you're not in the entertainment industry, if you work in, if you have a small business, you're going through a similar thing. You're watching all these consolidations and these conglomerates come in and take over and consolidate businesses, and you're missing the artistry and artisanship that went into making a piece of furniture from scratch, and it's all, you know, manufactured overseas. We're seeing this like throughout our industries. It's not just entertainment, and so it's if you're not in the entertainment industry and you're looking for parallels, they're there, unfortunately, everywhere right now. And then not only to look back at former strikes, but I would look at the music industry and what they went through with the rise of first Napster and then LimeWire, and how they went through a whole reckoning of how do we grapple with technology coming in and changing our industry so rapidly. And things are not perfect for the music industry by any way, in any way, shape, or means. But they did take a minute and they figured out a way to at least be sustainable with the streaming platforms that are more legit and that you're actually able to be paid for your content. I think the other thing that was mentioned was YouTube and social media, and it's so interesting now. More if Gen Z and younger are looking at they're going to TikTok to type in, how do I cut bangs? How do I cook an omelet? They're not going to Google or even YouTube like some of us that are not that young. They're going to TikTok for those things. So the platforms are changing. And what's really cool about that is that there's a democratization of access to audience, because all of a sudden you don't have to get to LA to do an audition. You don't have to be in New York to perform at a showcase. You can release a video on social media and be found and get a record deal 2 days later. And there's something really, really cool and democratizing about that. But at the same time, there is less bags of money, to steal another thing that was mentioned. There's less bags of money to go around. Everyone, there's more chance to become a quote unquote star or to have an opportunity to perform, but the paychecks are getting smaller and smaller, and it's making a career, it's making having a moment possible, but having a career in it much harder.
How do you make an omelet, by the way?
I mean, you've got to go to TikTok and look.
Yeah, that's exactly how long to put it in there.
Don't go to Google. Don't do it.
No Google?
It's not American.
Ah,
But I think to that point, you know, the title of this panel is about is it the end of content's, you know, golden age or
This
whatever.
is Duncan Crabtree Ireland from
Yeah.
Saigon. For those of you on the radio,
Hi,
right?
it's Duncan. But you know, what I think is so interesting about that is how do you define the golden age? Because I mean, that's a statement I've heard just in the 23 years I've worked at SAG-AFTRA. I've heard of several ends of content's golden age, and you know, to me, some people think of that as this vast amount of production, like, you know, Cynthia was citing the 600 series that were sort of you know, a little bit of a decline there, but I think it's not only like how many series there are, it's also, to Patrick's point, is it sustainable? You know, do those series, you know, allow someone to actually have a career and have us maintain a group of people who can be part of a creative culture? And so, you know, I think it's a bigger question than just how many projects are made. It's how much do those projects connect with audiences? How sustainable are they? Can they last in the long term? And can people be compensated fairly for them? Which are all the things we were, you know, talking about.
That whole, you know, we hit peak TV idea when there were so many shows, and it was more of a let's get it all out there so we get subscribers, right? And then they figured out, the streamers were like, oh no, we got all these subscribers and we can't make any money, so now we got to figure out how to make profits off of this. Was peak TV good for us? I mean, my watch list was a mile long and I still haven't gotten to that stuff.
I mean, I guess it depends. If you're a consumer, peak TV might have been good for you. Maybe you liked having that many choices, maybe you didn't. If you were an artist and you thought, oh wow, I finally landed a series, and then that series was gone after 1 year and it's not on any platform anymore, you're not making any residuals, you barely made any money because the series was only 8 episodes to begin with, that's problematic. That's the kind of change that I think has been referenced by the other panelists here as well, that this was a very fast-paced change over the last X number of years driven by streaming, and it's had a really detrimental impact on people who are trying to make a living, writers, actors, directors, everyone in the industry. So I guess I could imagine a golden age that actually is more sustainable, that actually is driven by the kind of content that can help people like Ron and like many other members of SAG-AFTRA and Writers Guild, Directors Guild actually be able to have a career. And as a person who wants to see what they create, I want them to have a career, because if they don't, then we miss out on that. I don't want to just have generic content that is not meaningful. And Karina, works with Kid Cudi. I mean, there was just as an example, a tremendous, very innovative project. I'm not sure if you were involved in it, but that was on Netflix that he put together. And I mean, these kinds of things don't come from AI. They don't spring from just randomness. They spring from creative talent being nurtured and having the chance to shine.
Ron Perlman, if you were starting now, what would you do differently?
Well, I wouldn't have worn these pants. No, I can't imagine that. I mean, I literally wrote a memoir a few years ago that was aimed at my kids and their friends, who were all just getting out of art school at the time. They were all graduating college. They were all like in their early 20s, and most of them wanted a career in the arts. And so I felt, what can I do that would be helpful? And so I wrote a book that nobody bought and helped them not at all. So if you're asking me, I think you're barking up the wrong tree, bro. But what was the question?
What would you do differently?
Yeah, I would be forlorn, because, and I've said this publicly a lot, genius is constant. There are still Stevie Wonders and Bob Dylans being born every day. The only thing that changes is how they make their way into the public eye. And that is controlled by interests that have devolved in such a way that this is what the strike really was epiphany-like for me, was, after years and years and years of being an artist on the other side of the bargaining table from people who, I had to come to terms with, and always feeling like there's something a little off here, the strike brought out in vast relief how, in order for the captains of industry, the robber barons of our day, in order for them to control us, they have to diminish us, they have to devalue us, and what is behind that? The only and this is the thing that I was finally hearing every time I made onto one of the picket lines and listening to all the speeches. Everybody was talking about runaway greed, and greed and culture are just not bedfellows. They're not only bad bedfellows; they're not bedfellows at all. So yeah, there's a lot of activity being made, but now they call it content rather than some sort of an ability to make a classic, like a Gone with the Wind.
By the way, we should mention, in case you're wondering, we did ask a number of studio executives to take part in this discussion, but all declined. No one here seems surprised by that.
Yes.
I'm so grateful.
They're so
Yes,
busy. They're
from
so
the
busy
audience.
catching up on all the content.
That's right. Yeah.
I want to pick up, though, on something that Duncan said, because I think it's instructive, as I was saying before, that the nature of the way as television in particular is produced has changed so much. And one thing that happened in a world of 600 shows, the idea of, it used to be in television, the goal was to have something, the goal was Law and Order, something that would go 20 years, ER 15 years, Grey's Anatomy 20 and counting. And that really changed in the era of streaming, because streamers have different calculations. A show just has a shorter shelf life in streaming, and that has been one of the big things. Not only do shows have shorter season, shorter number of seasons, but they produce fewer episodes. If you think of, Law and Order, ER, they did 22 episodes a year. Now it's more like 8 or 10 episodes. And for actors and writers, that's 8 or 10 paychecks versus 22 paychecks. That's not hard math to do. That's just one of 100 things that we could sit and talk about in terms of the way things have changed.
Hold it right there for just a second. And again, we're listening to Cynthia Littleton, who's the editor-in-chief of Variety, and you're listening to Streaming Wars, the end of content's golden age. I'm sorry, did you want to continue?
Well, just that, it's, again, in so many ways that viewers can see, maybe it might not be obviously evident, but that the nature of, Ron was on a show called Sons of Anarchy. I am blanking on the name of your showrunner. I don't know why.
For good reason.
Sorry. Anyway, it was a show with a massive following, and it was what television executives love more than anything is a renewable resource, a show that you can bank on is going to have a season 2 and a 3 and a 4 and hopefully get to double digits. And again, that whole calculation changed in the streaming era. You see shows, the third and final season. That used to be called failure. And now that is, again, because the feeling is that there's only so many episodes that a person is going to sample.
Yeah, is that a saving money phenomenon on the part of who's making those shows, or is this, as we had kind of hit on before, sometimes we just go with a safe bet, so you do something for a little while and then you trash it, or is this an attention span thing that, to talk about everyone on TikTok and YouTube, maybe we don't want Friends every Thursday night anymore for 7 years?
Well, it's a little bit of both, but as Duncan well knows, the salaries go up after season 4 and season 5 and season 6. So yeah,
everything used to disappear from Netflix after 3
all
seasons,
of a
right?
piece.
Yeah.
But it's not that we don't want it. This is Duncan speaking. It's not that we don't want it, because look at Suits. Suits on Netflix was the big breakout hit, if you want to call it that, of last year. And that's certainly not a 3-season show with 8 episodes per season. And, I know a lot of people who are binge watching Suits who missed it on the first go round. So maybe that'll create a sense that maybe there is room for more variety there.
Patrick Ohm is editor-in-chief of Entertainment Weekly.
Yeah, I think what's interesting, though, is one, I think that there's binging of those things, and that's fantastic that shows can have a second life and find a new audience. But I was fortunate enough to get to go to the premiere of the Friends reunion on what is now Max. And they did it. It was during COVID, so they did it at a big outdoor venue here in LA. And because it was finding a new audience, a younger audience, people that weren't even maybe alive when the show was originally on, they invited a lot of influencers and people that are famous on social media to help do promotion of it. And having them in the audience, they were doing a lot of trivia games and such in like the hour and a half before it started, and they were blasting them on the big screen. And what was great is that they were there and that this show found this audience. What was not great is to realize the difference in binge watching a show. And you might love 10 seasons of Friends, but because they're not having that cultural experience that Karina was talking about earlier of like watching something together, they were quizzing them on like iconic lines that any of us that watched that show in real time and every Friday went to either school or work and talked about it.
Pivot.
Yeah, exactly,
Right.
pivot. But they were asking them like, I think most of us would know the end of that is Lobster. Because to them, it was just one more episode that they watched out of 10 they watched that day. There was, the plot lines they could remember, but all these like just touchstones from that show, and it was fascinating to see that. And so there's great things about the binging, but to the point of like a collective experience, it makes it a little bit harder. And I think that is something that we do miss, even when you do have a hit on streaming, unless it's released weekly in a way that everyone is watching it. It's tough. I will say, Traders is that one thing for me right now. One, it was the thing that got me to get Peacock because everyone was talking about it and I'd missed season 1. And so now season 2, it's that thing that every Thursday, I can't wait to watch it and talk about it the next day because they're releasing it weekly. And so there's a lot going on here in terms of lack of communal experience that's important to making something a cultural moment.
Because you mentioned getting Peacock, is there a lot of dipping in and out these days of all these streamers, because it used to be you could get them and save some money because you didn't want the cable bill, right? But now it's kind of like, I feel like people keep Netflix and then they get the other ones for a couple months and then I'll get off of there.
But really, that happened I mean, if you just go back to HBO and Showtime, like HBO and Showtime, they see those same influxes. Like when Game of Thrones was on, they'd see an uptick in subscribers, and then it would dip back down. So, and they clearly were able to make that sustainable. I think where it's difficult is HBO kind of would take 4 or 5 big bets in a year and then have other programming that were smaller bets. And as long as they had something all year round, that was enough to keep people around, enough to make them profitable. In a way that on streaming, they're trying to do that times 60 or sometimes 600, and that's when it gets unsustainable.
Although, it's interesting, this is Duncan again, the data, there's an industry analytics company called Antenna that released recently some data about the churn rate on streamers, and it is noticeably different. It has gone up during, if you cross-reference it with the sort of decline in original content, there has been increased churn in most of the streamers. And it seems to me that what is happening right now is they are testing out, what is the level of original content versus acquired content and library content that they need to have in order to keep their ideal level of subscribers. And so I think we haven't seen the result yet. We are in the middle of the experiment.
Well, I think the other thing that you're starting to see is that...
By the way, that's Karina.
Hi. Sports is beating out content as far as a communal experience right now. And you're seeing the reflection from the streamers. I mean, you've got Amazon picking up Thursday Night Football, and now they're going to get a playoff game next year. You've got Paramount getting Champions League, or Peacock getting Premier League, or even Nickelodeon doing a simulcast of the Super Bowl, which was maybe one of the greatest pieces of content that's happened in recent
SpongeBob
years.
was calling the plays.
Fantastic.
He's pro-union.
It's fantastic, but that also, I mean, it's interesting. We talk about how much attention Taylor Swift has gotten for showing up in the Chiefs game and how that shifted the NFL and what that value means. But also, you're seeing SpongeBob and Taylor Swift getting kids and their parents to watch football together. So I do think the almost like competition to what we're trying to do on our side with traditional content, you're getting it major on the sports side.
I have to. Oh, can I just? Oh,
yeah,
sorry. Just to that point, Taylor Swift is a great example of how artists can, especially artists who have a lot of power and leverage in a given moment or over a period of time, can really use it. I mean, look at how she basically broke the studio distribution system with the Eras Tour movie, went directly to AMC. She also, and every time I get the chance, I have to applaud this because she used her leverage when she moved her label over to UMG. She used her leverage not just for herself, but for other artists to ensure that when there was a divestment in their ownership of Spotify, that some of those proceeds were shared with all of the artists on that label. That was something that was done by, in this case, an individual SAG-AFTRA member artist, but was able to actually break something for everyone. And I think that's the kind of collective power that individuals can have, creative talent can have, if they just recognize it.
Ron Perlman.
The other thing that she did was the people, the crew members who moved her in and out of venues on a yearly basis all got little thank yous of hundreds of thousands of dollars. So she became like a folklore hero because she returned the dignity of if I'm successful, everybody around me who helps me should be successful. And that, if I had to point to any one thing that basically is behind the disconnect and why all of the things that are being discussed have to do with data and have to do with, well, we got to figure out what they want, what the suckers want. Let's go to our algorithms. That'll tell us. And so they're what is it called? Engineering backwards.
Oh, reverse engineering.
The reverse engineer. You don't make culture by reverse engineer, by thinking that you know what the audience wants. That's why none of these companies will be around in 5 years. They're just not sustainable because the concept of making beautiful things that are going to be memorable, that are going to be cherished by the world, and the concept of reverse engineering what you're going to make for your audience because you think they're a bunch of jerks and they don't know what they want and they don't have any concentration spans and they can only deal with 5 minutes. I'm rambling here, but I'm really mad, and I'm not going to take it anymore.
Ron Perlman there. You're listening to a town hall on the future of Hollywood. We're calling it Streaming Wars, the end of content's golden age. Let me just reintroduce the panel if you're just joining us. We have Ron Perlman, veteran actor, writer, producer, Hellboy. He was in Sons of Anarchy, Wing and a Prayer Studio. He's the founder and director. Cynthia Littleton, co-editor-in-chief at Variety. Karina Manishill, Mad Solar Productions. They did X, they did Pearl. Patrick Gomez, Entertainment Weekly, editor-in-chief. And Duncan Crabtree Ireland with SAG-AFTRA.
Cynthia, let's talk about what the audience is going to see, both in the movies and on television, on their phones, wherever they're watching it. To Ron Perlman's point, all of this reverse engineering doesn't sound like it's going to lead to very interesting, whether theatrical releases or programming on TV. Do you have any sort of hope that that is incorrect, that maybe Ron's wrong about that?
I think I want to I would be a little contrarian to Ron.
Oh, no.
Who gave did a great Patty Chayefsky performance here just a minute ago. Sorry, we don't have a window for you to hang out of, but I do think that, I think you look around and we can all, again, I keep fixating, but I think there is no algorithm that would tell you to give Greta Gerwig the tools to make the Barbie movie that she made. That had to be a gut check. That had to be, we believe in this person, we believe in their vision, and we've heard the stories of how that movie came, that there were efforts to tuck it in, and she said, no, this is the movie, and the end result is the end result. There's no algorithm that says that people will flock to a 3-hour movie about the father of the atomic bomb, as they did with Oppenheimer, a fantastic movie that came out this past year. The folks at the programmers at the best places, at HBO, at FX, these are still people that at the end of the day read a script, assess talent, and say, I believe in this person. I'm going to back this person. HBO's fantastic miniseries Chernobyl is a perfect example. No algorithm would say that people would be moved by this piece of work, but they were. I think it still exists. But I think part of this ramp up of the peak TV, of getting to 600 series, of literally throwing content at the wall and see what sticks, I think that was not a golden age. It was a bubble. It was an unsustainable bubble, and especially I think as we got through the pandemic and toward the strike, really was a bookend. The strike, and also the event that Karina referenced, which was, if I have my math right, April of 2022, when Netflix for the first time had to acknowledge to Wall Street that they lost subscribers. That was when the bubble burst, because until that time, HBO Max and Paramount Plus and everybody was thinking the sky is the limit in terms of subscribers. We might get 1 billion subscribers, therefore we can spend as much as we can muster on content. When Netflix, which was the rocket that proved the model for everybody, when Netflix almost 2 years ago actually had to acknowledge that we're losing subscribers, that meant that the irrational exuberance that was driving every studio to spend 10x what they had been spending on content, because the prize was going to be those 1 billion subscribers, when the ceiling on Netflix's global growth seemed to be at about 250 at the point 2 years ago when they were losing subscribers. Just a couple weeks ago, they announced that they're gaining subscribers at a good clip. So it's up and down, but the important inflection points here are really important to remember. But back to the cusp of the crux of your question, I think that there is still a ton of creativity. There is so much. When talking to writers and actors on the picket lines, there is so much creativity and so much desire out there, but it is at a moment when just getting through that pipeline, even at a time of 600 shows, became harder than ever, and people were sort of banging their heads against the wall. Why? So I think the drop in production can only help.
We've talked a lot about TV, and I wanted, since you mentioned Barbie and Oppenheimer, I want to talk about movies here. And Karina, maybe Patrick, you want to chime in on this too. I mean, besides the big tentpole Barbenheimer phenomenon, are we getting butts in seats these days, or are the theaters and the studios still having trouble with that. And a lot, I think, changed during the pandemic. I talked to some people this morning. They were saying, I just don't really have the drive anymore. I wait till it comes on TV anyways. I can wait a few months. What's waiting a few months?
I really quickly, just to address, I think one of the things that's interesting about what was just being said about the streaming wars and trying to compete about how much content, that competition's always existed. CBS and ABC and NBC always wanted to win whatever hour of television they currently had on. The answer to that was having the best content, and that was how you won, and that's how you got the better advertisers. What's difficult now is the business model is subscription-based, where it is less about that because it's not a one-to-one competition of, you've got Only Murders on the Building at the same time that we've got our prestige comedy. It's not that anymore. It's you could watch those two completely different at completely different times, and so that makes the competition a lot harder. But apologies, I totally didn't answer your question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's a really valuable question. When I look at Barbie and Oppenheimer, what we can't forget is that Oppenheimer is one of the most celebrated filmmakers of our time. Barbie is, despite how incredible the take is still IP. So I do think that the traditional film system is still relying on what are the kind of broadest common denominators that are going to attract people that make them want to show up. And I think what you'd hope to see is, again, the romantic that Ron mentioned, where it's really about entertaining, it's really about capturing imagination, it's really about changing perspectives so that the studios feel more willing to invest in the next crop of artists and filmmakers and trust their visions, which are separate from something that's pre-existed, to give them opportunity. And I would love to see that moment. I think, too, it's interesting is I consider technology at large, and we touched on TikTok, we touched on the democratization of art, which I think is a key component as to what's happening here. If I'm a young artist, if I'm one of those geniuses, am I going to go through the traditional system and wait and hope that one of those studios is going to shift their perspective and give me a shot? Or best case, I get some piece of IP that they trust me with, but then I'm not really living into my authentic version.
Or are
of
you
being an
writing and
artist.
doing another superhero movie? I mean, we've had 50 of them, right?
No, but that feeling. So how can I make the next Marvel film feel different than what has existed before? It's not. I'm not necessarily putting my uniqueness onto that conversation. But then if it is a democracy, and if I can go to TikTok and I can go to these other mediums and express myself musically, artistically, exactly as I am, and monetize that potentially better and faster, is that a better use of my time? And I think part of the danger in what the system is invoking is less incentive for the young crop of artists to actually follow through with this side of the industry.
I will just add that, as a journalist,
That's Patrick Gomez, by the way, editor-in-chief of Entertainment Weekly.
As a journalist, I've seen that in our industry too. Like, there are some journalists who are like, I could make way more money producing TikToks and talking to camera about the same stories that I'm writing about and gain a following there, and I can go make endorsement deals that I'm not allowed to do. It's again not just on the creative side of covering the entertainment industry. I'm seeing it on our side as well, and it's fascinating because it's great to see that, but at the same time, you just wish that the institutions that had the infrastructure to amplify those voices could figure out a way to keep them.
And I'll say, too, because this goes back to your commentary that what's happening in the film business is reflective of something that's happening everywhere. And I think the kind of crux of what we're dealing with is that us as a younger generation has come up and we were sold this bill of goods that you go to school, you put your head down, you get a good job, then you get promoted, you're going to afford a house, a wife, a family, all of those things that your parents had before you for doing exactly that same thing. But the truth of it is inflation has essentially priced them out of the market. And all of those endeavors not leading to any of the promises that were on the other side. Instead, you're riddled with student loan debt. The housing market is completely, you can't even approach it. So you're looking, well, where do I fit? Like, how do I actually get those things that I was promised? And the reaction is these quick grabs with technology. It's how do I use crypto when it's hot and all of a sudden make a fortune quickly? Or how do I jump on this influencer market where I'm not necessarily needing to display a trade skill or any of those things to sort of get an opportunity. And I think that fervor is something that we're seeing reflected in everything that's happening on our side.
If you're just joining us, you're listening to a town hall on Hollywood. Streaming Wars, the end of content's golden age. We're going to do audience questions now. We got a question from David.
Hi. With streamers making less content, film, TV, here, what are we seeing, if anything, being done to keep production here in LA or Southern California?
Who wants to take that one?
I think, excuse me, I think
Cynthia Littleton.
I think that there has been an interesting, and I know Duncan has experienced this too, there's been an interesting sort of surge of talent that has the clout to say, I want to work in Los Angeles, which also means, or if they live on the West Coast, or I want to work in New York, but I don't want to live in New York and work in Toronto, or live in Los Angeles and work in Vancouver, or live in Los Angeles and work 4 months out of the year in Sydney. You have the talent that has the clout is, you're seeing them increasingly saying, I want to work here. But there is no question that there are so many places outside of Los Angeles that are just lining up with those sacks of money, the production incentives, tax incentives to bring things to inside the U.S., other states, and also outside the U.S. And that is something that California has really struggled with. I know it's hard for folks in Sacramento to understand that Hollywood needs the help, but there are so many competing forces, and it's hard to believe, but there is a world where it's cost effective for a studio to send an entire crew and tons of equipment down to literally another continent because they're going to get those kinds of incentives and those kind of tax breaks. And they're in the world of with all the problems that we've been talking about, anything that is going to save people 5 cents that studios are going to pursue. It's a real push and pull, but it has been to see talent use their clout to say, I want to work here.
David, did that answer your question? Yeah.
Can I add just to that point? I mean, obviously,
it's Duncan
SAG-AFTRA
Crabtree, Ireland.
Yeah, the Duncan from SAG-AFTRA. SAG-AFTRA is a national union, right? And actually, we have members internationally. So we look at this also from a sort of a bigger perspective. LA County, I agree with what Cynthia has said, Los Angeles and Hollywood. There's a lot of reasons why people want to produce here. There's a lot of reasons they want to produce elsewhere. Big companies like Netflix have built production facilities outside of Los Angeles. For example, Netflix has one in New Mexico. And so the reality is there are established production centers around this country where there is infrastructure, there's talented crew, there's talented actors and writers and directors and people who will go there to work as well. When we think about production leaving the United States and going to other countries, that of course raises a whole host of other issues. And I do think that the advent of film incentives in the United States and tax credits and things like that have been really important to helping keep production in the United States. And I think that there's a combination between creative talent pushing for it, infrastructure being present, and those kinds of incentives and things being present to help make sure that continues to happen here. And if I could just add, Karina referenced, and I think Patrick also made reference to content creators, and I think we should acknowledge when we talk about things like TikTok, so this is off of your question but slightly related, when we talk about things like TikTok, if institutions like SAG-AFTRA and also all of us need to recognize that there is legitimate talented creative expression going on these platforms as well. And it is a mistake, in my view, for us to discount that because, yes, you may open up TikTok and you may see a bunch of stuff that doesn't qualify as that, perhaps, but there is a lot going on there that's really interesting. SAG-AFTRA has an influencer agreement now. We welcome content creators into our membership, and let me just tell you, some of those content creators who are working on TikTok today will be film and television not just stars, but like really talented creators tomorrow, and some of them are even that today. So I would just urge everyone, don't discount the fact that there is perhaps maybe a new generation that's coming up through places like TikTok that have a lot of interesting things to say and a lot of creativity to contribute.
We have another, let's take another question though, from Alan, I think it is. Yeah.
My question really is the young lady from Variety talked about the pressure on working Hollywood. I don't know that you guys have really considered things like what it's done to the working Hollywood groups of people. I worked at one of the big streamers, which I won't mention, but the visual effects industry has been decimated by these strikes, and literally is in a death spiral right now. And I'm wondering, was this really thought through? What this has done, especially maybe Duncan and Ron, and the rest of you can answer. This has done real damage.
I'll actually, though I'm not one of the people that work in covering it, one, I have a lot of friends that work in visual effects, and so I know from their perspective of how devastating this has been. It was devastating for those of us that cover entertainment because, I'm fortunate to work at a company that didn't have to make any difficult decisions during that part of the process, but it was something that weighed on us every day because there was less to cover. And so, are they going to say that we need less people? Again, I was very fortunate to work at a place that decision didn't have to be made, but not everyone was as lucky. But at the end of the day, I think it's one of those things, as was mentioned earlier, how we're on the precipice of more strikes because unfortunately, this work is not done. And if these strikes and things hadn't happened, a lot of people in entertainment wouldn't necessarily have jobs in a few years from now anyway. And so it is this weird, like, are we making this sacrifice now to make sure that we have a place to come and continue to work 10 years from now? And the sad part is that we don't know that that's going to be the case because the change is going to continue to happen. And who's to say that another strike's not down the line for another contingent of the industry that's going to be even more devastating? And that's what's scary and uncertain. But at the same time, I have faith that we are doing all of this, or that all of this is happening, because without it, then it doesn't matter. We all had jobs for 4 more years.
Can I just add to this? This is Duncan from SAG-AFTRA. I mean, I really hear the question that you're asking, and let me just say that this the creative community is an interconnected community of a whole bunch of people whose work all depends on each other, and it was not lost on me or President Drescher or any of our leadership at SAG-AFTRA the impact that the strike was going to have and did have on our siblings in Audacy, in Teamsters, in all kinds of businesses that aren't even necessarily unionized that are part of this industry. So yes, that was a very tough part of making the decision to do what we had to do. But our members believe, and I certainly believe, that this was a moment in time when that had to happen. I mean, not for everything that's in that, we have a 129-page contract. Not everything in there was what we would strike over. But when you think about where AI is headed, when you think about the impact that the streaming business has had that we've been talking about in this panel, these were not things we could leave for 3 more years. I mean, this is not, SAG-AFTRA has not historically been a strike-happy union. The last time we struck in this contract was 40 years ago. It's 40 years ago. So we're not, ignoring the impact that had. And every single day we were on the picket lines side by side with Teamsters, laborers, IATSE crew members from all the different unions, the basic craft unions, DGA, AFM, all of these other workers from our industry were out there side by side with us. And I was hearing firsthand from them about the impact the strike was having. But what I was also hearing was, fight to break the pattern because we need that. Fight to protect all of us from AI because we need that. So this was not just a strike for writers or for actors. This was a strike to send a message to the industry that where they were headed was not okay with any of us. And I fully expect and believe that we will see the benefit from that this year in the IATSE negotiations, Teamsters negotiations, AFM, and all the other unions that are dealing with the studios.
May I just throw out there, Duncan, that one thing that
Cynthia, by the way, Cynthia Little.
One thing that became clear, obviously there is a massive income gap. The wealth gap in this country is a macroeconomic challenge. We see it within the Hollywood ecosystem. CEOs make a factor of several hundred of tend to make what the baseline employee makes. But there is a big income gap in the creative community as well. There are the $20 million players, there's the $10 million players, and one among the actors, the stars, the names on the marquee that bring people. And one thing that became so clear when actors and writers had just gotten fed up and would just tell you their story, their burdens, it became very clear that to pay some of those gigantic salaries, they had to cut corners and squeeze it out of the hide of virtually everyone else on the set. And now that's not to say that, what the answer there is, but the income gap within the creative community is significant, and I think something that is going to have to be addressed long term.
And I really quickly just want to
Perlman,
clarify.
But hold on. But Ron, I'm curious because you wear two hats, right, or many hats. But one is as an actor, but also you're a producer. Do you view the developments in the industry differently when you're wearing your actor's hat as opposed to when you're the guy sort of running the show?
Well, as a producer, I hate all actors. And as an actor, I despise producers. So luckily I'm very, very well medicated right now, and I'm kind of keeping an even keel. I just long for a fair playing field, and it's heartbreaking to listen to the impact that work stoppage had on you and my friends who are costumers, and my friends who cut hair, and my friends who apply makeup, and my friends who screw in light bulbs and carry cable. It was heartbreaking. I was on Instagram Live all through the strike talking about how this was not your strike, and yet you're just as affected as anyone else. But the disingenuousness that is baked into the people who we sit across the aisle from is criminal. And our better angels kind of long for a little bit of dignity and fairness and recognition and respect. And, do I think this strike got us that? No. But I think, is it something that needed to be addressed? Unfortunately, yes.
And just really quickly, in terms of recognition, I do want to acknowledge. Thank you. Yes, Patrick from EW. Acknowledge that, yes, to your point, we maybe weren't articulating the hardships that are facing the industry through the lens of people beyond the writers and actors, because that happened to be what we were just talking about. But it is true. Everything that we said about an 8-episode series versus a 22-episode series, everything about the downsizing and the just total flux, it affected, as Ron just mentioned, so many departments, including visual effects, including so many other departments that we don't even think about that go into creating content. So yes, everyone should extrapolate everything we just said to be about all of those parts of the industry as well.
We have another question.
It's not unnoticed that visual effects is very actively unionizing in a way that we haven't seen domestically in the U.S. right now. It's very
we have time. Thank you. We have time
squeeze in one last one.
Question. Yeah. What's your name?
Hey, I'm BJ.
BJ.
Yeah. Hey, with the recent announcement of Project Raptor, the consolidation of sports programming that's going to be happening here in streaming, I wonder how that's going to show face here for non-sports entertainment content.
Who wants to take that one?
Are you talking about the sports joint venture that was announced by Disney, Fox, and Warner Brothers
Yes, ma'am,
Discovery? Correct. Yeah. That's a really interesting example of everything old is new again. That kind of sounds like a cable bundle, right? Be very interesting to see how they price that. And there is a lot of speculation. You can read about it in Variety. There's a lot of speculation.
EW2.
That
Yeah, right.
The old, yes, EW2. That the old, everything old could be new again in terms of even streamers bundling themselves, because who wouldn't want one bill versus 10 that come in now? So I think that will be very interesting. That sports play is a hedge. It's an absolute hedge, because ESPN, the day after they announced that, Disney announced that ESPN, as of next year, you can buy it standalone. That's a seismic shift in the content business.
And I think what's so interesting there is that we're already seeing it too. Like, if you get your mobile phone provider offers you now, when you sign up for your mobile phone, oh, by the way, you can get, and these are unrelated, you can get Disney Plus and Netflix and this, and if you do all of it, you get this. It's totally circling right back around to cable. And as somebody who hasn't cut the cord because of my job, I need it. It's going to be fascinating to see how, if we get to bundling in both cable and streaming, how that all combines maybe eventually.
Duncan, Duncan Crabtree, Ireland from SAG-AFTRA. What's the next battle? Because the contract that you just completed, of course, doesn't last forever. So what's the next?
It doesn't last forever. That contract will be back in negotiation in 2 years. But you know what's going on right now? Same type of negotiation, same people, AMPTP, television animation negotiations, because it's not covered by that contract, going on this week. A week and a half ago, we were negotiating with the major record labels over the same types of issues, AI issues among others, for singers and recording artists. And we also have an ongoing negotiation with the video game companies. Interactive, you may have heard, we have a strike authorization already on that contract. So a lot of these contracts, you know, people say, aren't you glad you can stop talking about AI now that this is done? And I say I would be glad if I could stop talking about AI, but no, this is going to be an ongoing issue for multiple rounds of bargaining, and I don't think we're out of the woods yet.
All right, that's all we have time for tonight. A big thank you to our panelists for taking time out of a very busy awards season schedule to be here for a very important conversation.
This has been a presentation of KNX News in Los Angeles, airing on Audacy stations coast to coast. Special thanks to the Autry Museum for their support. For our producer, Jonathan Service and Charles Feldman, I'm Mike Simpson. Good night.
Streaming Wars, the end of content's golden age, is a production of KNX News 97.1 FM and Audacy Los Angeles.
Sponsored by the Autry. Presenting Masters of the American West, opening February 10th.
Watch and listen on demand at knxnews.com and on the free Audacy app.